So let's go straight over to my first guest. He's the brilliant former political editor of The Sun, Trevor Kavanagh. Hi, Trevor.
Hi, Kevin. Good to talk to you again.
Always a pleasure. And your seasoned take on what went on yesterday across the pond will be very valued. I mean, I don't want to be pessimistic about this. And, you know, I, like everyone, I hope peace is achieved. I think all the smoke and mirrors we're getting are obscuring the fact it's an extremely long shot, but fingers crossed. What I thought, my takeaway from what we saw yesterday on the telly was a humiliation for the not so magnificent 7 European leaders who for some reason flew all the way across the Atlantic to you know, worship at the altar of President Trump. You know, the new world order. He summons us to discuss a war on our continent. Off they go. Zelensky and Trump go into a separate room to discuss matters alone, while our 7 Euro gang leaders all are corralled into a room where they're given a buffet lunch, and they're not even allowed to stage their walk-on parts, their minor walk-on parts, until after the Oval Office press conference. I mean, it was embarrassing for us, embarrassing for Britain, embarrassing for all the European countries, wasn't it?
It was, and I think we deserved all we got, including Britain and including Starmer. And I think your rather depressing portrait of how this is going and how it will pan out is likely to turn out to be true. There may well be an end to the war, but it won't be on terms which are favourable to Ukraine. They will be on terms favourable to Putin. And if it's a temporary halt, it'll only be temporary, while in fact Putin regathers his forces. And at some point down the line, with extra land that he will certainly grab in the process of this deal, if it's a deal at all, he will resume those hostile attacks when we're looking somewhere else in about 2 or 3 years' time, if that long.
Indeed. I mean, and down the line, I mean, you know, this much vaunted potential meeting between Trump, Zelensky and Putin, note, no European leaders required. If this happens, as you say, I think the requirements, the demands that Putin puts on the table will be, I reckon, impossible for the Ukrainian people to swallow. We mustn't forget, it actually is not in Zelensky's gift to make the deal on his own, such as the Ukrainian constitution, that he has to go to the people in a referendum to ask them whether or not the peace deal on the table is acceptable to them. And what we hear is that most Ukrainians feel that for more than 2 years, you know, they've sacrificed so much, so many lives lost, that they're not in the mood to say, oh, well, at the end of it, we'll cede the territory that we have fought so hard and disastrously to keep, or in terms of the loss of lives. So again, I don't want to seem pessimistic, but the way some of the coverage has been going, you'd think that, you know, this is just about it. We've just about done the deal. There is one hell of a long way to go. Interesting also, Trevor, that, you know, since Friday, don't forget when Putin came in from the cold in Alaska, of all places, the deal that they were going to talk about was a ceasefire. Within seconds, Putin seems to have persuaded Trump it needs to be a full-time peace. And here is Trump talking about that.
I don't think you need a ceasefire. You know, if you look at the 6 deals that I settled this year, they were all at war. I didn't do any ceasefires. And I know that it might be good to have, but I can also understand strategically why, well, you know, one country or the other wouldn't want it. You have a ceasefire and they rebuild and rebuild and rebuild, and, you know, maybe they don't want that. But if you look at the 6 deals, we made peace and you know, long-term, long-running wars. I didn't do any ceasefires. I just spoke to President Putin indirectly, and we're going to have a phone call right after these meetings today. And we may or may not have a trilat. If we don't have a trilat, then the fighting continues. And if we do, we have a good chance. I think if we have a trilat, there's a good chance of maybe ending it. But he's expecting my call when we're finished with this meeting.
Well, look, I think, Trevor, that Trump deserves full credit for moving the dial significantly, bringing Putin to the table and at least getting something in motion that may give us reason for optimism. I think that is a very big may. That said, he's going, oh, no, we don't need a ceasefire. Well, actually, that's why they met in Alaska. Within an hour, Putin has persuaded Trump, no, not a ceasefire, we need a full peace. So Trump's sort of acting as if he's dictating the narrative, but I'm not so sure he is.
The point here, Kevin, is that Trump wants this done and dusted. He doesn't want any more killing, which is a very noble objective. But how do we get there? We get there by handing victory, in effect, to Putin. And we also hand over territory, which will be very valuable territory, including those rare earth minerals. And we will end up with a deal on energy, which will help the Russian economy and indeed help the American economy. And we may all be rather pleased when the shooting stops in the West, because it's a rather long way away from here. And we don't care too much what happens after that end of hostilities. But it won't be an end to hostilities. And the other point is that this deal holds out the carrot of a possible Clause 5 deal on which, if Ukraine is attacked, it is dealt with as if it were a NATO nation, and that all of the other NATO nations rally to its defense. Now, it's very significant that at that meeting in the White House, the member states of European Union and NATO closest to Russia, that is Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic and Romania, were not represented. I think that's a very important thing, particularly Hungary. Do you, or does anyone believe that weakened, impoverished European countries, whether they're part of NATO or not, will ride to the rescue at huge cost in blood and treasure to a country like Ukraine?
Well, exactly. Well, as I say, Trump seems to feel that this can be thrashed out in the absence of all the European leaders, and particularly the European leaders who weren't there yesterday. Questions remain as to what the hell Starmer and his 6 buddies were doing there, the not so magnificent 7. Absolutely embarrassing scenes, as they weren't even allowed in until after the press conference. And here is Starmer when he finally got his oar in.
Can I start where Emmanuel started, which is we all want peace. The war in Ukraine has had a huge impact, particularly on the Ukrainians who've borne the brunt of it, but it's also had an impact on Europe and on the United Kingdom. There's not a family or community that hasn't been affected. And when we talk about security, we're talking about the security not just of Ukraine, we're talking about the security of Europe and the United Kingdom as well, which is why this is such an important issue.
Well, the first thing I want to say there, Trevor, is I hope that the Prime Minister's cold sore, that significant blotch on his bottom lip, heals soon. A lot of people talking about that. He's obviously very run down. But his contribution is just meaningless. I mean, we aren't going to have much effect on whatever deal may be thrashed out. As I say, I think it's unlikely a deal will be thrashed out. But if one is, it's clear from yesterday that Britain and the rest of the Euro gang aren't going to play much of a part.
Well, I mentioned that the European states and members of the NATO agreement are certainly not going to rally at their cost and at military risk any serious defense of Ukraine after this is signed and sealed. It's going to fall apart and they will not come to its rescue. But least of all of those who are going to come to the rescue of Ukraine is a Starmer-led United Kingdom. He's talking about sending out British forces to help defend and keep the peace. But as our former Defence Secretary has pointed out, we've hardly got any armed forces to send in the first place. And we're not spending the money we need to maintain a proper defence force. Our military spending is abysmal. And where it is being spent, it's being spent on soft power, not hardware. We're not in a position to do what Keir Starmer is promising or hinting at. This is just empty talk, and frankly, It's typical of Keir Starmer in every aspect of his premiership.
Couldn't agree more, and I suspect that when push comes to shove, if it does come to the point where European boots have got to get on the ground, possibly with Americans, although I doubt that somehow, but possibly with Americans, I suspect that the coalition of the willing will swiftly become the coalition of the unwilling. You cannot rely on these Europeans in these circumstances. We're talking about Germany, we're talking about France. War is a difficult proposition for those countries. It's not great for us either. Just before you go, Trevor, always good to talk to you, by the way, a quick take from you on our flag row. We've got two councils right now still in the process of ripping down hundreds of Union Jacks and St George's Cross flags put up there in what was called an outpouring of patriotism. This was all hundreds of lampposts in Birmingham and Tower Hamlets in East London. Both councils ripping them down, ridiculously saying they're a risk to life, they're dangerous, although apparently the Palestinian flags that they've left flying high and proud are not a risk to life. Now, a lot of people are very angry about this. You know, why is our flag to be ripped down in shame while the Palestinian flags continues to fly? Well, Keir Starmer, through his number 10 communications operation, has let it be known that he's in favour of the patriots here, that he thinks that what they did, putting these flags on these lampposts, was great. Well, shouldn't he do something about it and stop these town hall tyrants and their war on our national flag?
You're talking about Keir Starmer, Kevin. I mean, would you rely on him to do anything that he promises? I mean, look, this would be comical if it were not so dangerously sinister. These are the symptoms of a country sleepwalking into basically a religious war on the streets. The difference is that Britain isn't very religious, but the people who are putting up these Palestinian flags and other flags representing the Muslim communities, which are very close to being the majority in some of these areas. This is a serious dispute and a break in the civic structure of our country. And it inevitably is going to lead to more protests, and maybe increasingly angry and even violent protests by people who have been deemed to be far right by this Labour far left government, when in fact they're normal citizens trying to protect themselves, their families and their children from a changing society which has dismayed so many people. And I've been talking to a number of people outside politics, people who have moved to places like Dubai, who, when they come back for their tax-free periods of, 3 or 4 months, find themselves absolutely dismayed by the way that this country has deteriorated, just traveling around from the airport to their homes, from their homes into London. And they've seen in the space of months, perhaps a year, in fact, the length of time that Keir Starmer has been Prime Minister, the deterioration visible on the streets of this country.
I'll tell you what, Trevor, it's very depressing, and I think those of us who continue to live here and endure it can feel it palpably. Something is going badly wrong with this country, and the people at the helm, this Labour government, are incapable of doing anything about it. It's very, very worrying. But great to talk to you as always, Trevor. Thank you so much for your time. Trevor Kavanagh there, former political editor of The Sun.